Alright, YouTube, I was going to do an MLK video yesterday, but it was too many videos. I don't like to overload people. I'm trying to be somewhat conscientious of those who have complained that there are too many videos of mine in their subscription feed, while at the same time covering all necessary material. Like, I figure in any given day, unless it's a total fuckfest of a day, 3 or 4 videos suffices to cover the major points within the news, as well as, do a Minecraft episode or an MRE or whatever it happens to be that I want to do as well. Also, either today or tomorrow, I'll probably be doing a special video. I won't tell you what it's about. It has to do with some vintage things that I typically collect, and I think people would like to see the collection that I've amassed. It's pretty cool. I'll just say that much. It's not book related, it's actually art related, which I don't know. Some of you probably didn't expect that I was into that sort of stuff, but I'll cover that. This video, though, is about how Martin Luther King, essentially, if he was alive today and he saw groups like BLM, he'd think they were morons, number one. He'd probably consider them to be little different from street gangs, number 2. And probably beat them in the head with a hammer, number 3, out of pure disdain for their principles. Let us not forget that Martin Luther King was a gun owner on a government watch list. Now, I know that this sort of cliche term that's used by the Libertarian Party, it can fall flat, but it's also true, and it needs to be mentioned. Martin Luther King, as an activist, was considered a possible commie by the U.S. government, was killed by the U.S. government, actually, indeed, was assassinated by them specifically for, I guess, rabble-rousing, being too dangerous. He was too much of a leader. The reason why is because at a time when a lot of civil rights leaders were beginning to egg their supporters on and suggest what you could consider more violent activism, Martin Luther King wasn't really, he didn't really care if he got killed. He would have rather have been martyred, I think, anyway. Now, was he a flawed character? Yes. Some people make him out to be larger than life, above all reproach, like he never did anything wrong in his life. That's not true. He liked his women, let's just say, and so forth. But at the same time, overall, his message was, well, fuck this shit. We want togetherness. We want, essentially, when you think about it, civic nationalism, sort of this American identity that transcends race. And that never happened, obviously. At the end of the day, the Louis Farrakhan's ultimately managed to fool enough of the black community into following them to keep the violence and the stupidity going. It's just like there are people for every given racial or ethnic category. There are always going to be people who ultimately they want to line their own pockets that tell them, oh yeah, we're being put upon and it's the fault of this other group. And Martin Luther King fundamentally identified that the real problem was government. It was government policy. It was the segregation that came from government. It didn't come from some random white person on the street who, for all you know, was a freedom rider or something like that. And that's correct. It wasn't that every white person in the country got together and said, it'd be so fucking great. Let's just abuse like these millions of people here because, we don't like them because they have more melanin in their skin or something. In a lot of the states, there never was segregation. Like here in Vermont, and people often, they think of it as homogenous here. There actually are minorities here, but we never had segregation. We didn't have it back then. We didn't have slavery. Nobody gave a shit. And welcomed minorities into the community, and it never caused a problem. There was never any social alienation connected with it because people are like, "Oh, what? Huh? We're living out in a cabin in the woods. What do we care about all these issues that they have down in Selma or something like that?" And Martin Luther King, I think, understood this more than a lot of other people during his time period. It's really funny. What really strikes me as amusing is watching people like Clinton that ramble about the differences between races, so much that you have to question their motives, trying to take credit for Martin Luther King was one of us, is such a great man. But at the time, people like Clinton and Obama were the people trying to get him assassinated and trying to tar and feather his reputation and prop up like the Louis Farrakhan's and stuff like that, or the Malcolm X's. that wanted to see more violence and division and so forth. People who wanted, literally, in some cases, you listen to some of these people, they're actually arguing for resegregating the United States along a state line. Even like Tom Metzger, I can remember back in the 90s, Tom Metzger made some appearances. And he said, yeah, I agree with like these, like the Louis Farrakhan's and stuff. They're talking about wanting a black ethno-state, like carve it out of the United States, like they'll take like Alabama, Mississippi, and Georgia. Yeah, I'm fine with that. That's perfectly okay. It's like ceding land. Whenever you get a movement that tells you that you should withdraw, cede a chunk of land, whether you're the majority or the minority, to form an ethno-state, that's not how ethno-states should form in the first place. This is one of the difficulties of like ethno-nationalism. You've just ceded a region of productivity to give it to some other group of people that have snapped away from you in the name of stability that's not even guaranteed, because it ignores all the other issues that are going on. It ignores larger economic issues and social issues even within races. It ignores, like, you know, rich versus poor, whatever it happens to be. And that's one of my main problems with some of the suggestions that are made by some of these people. And regardless of my overall thoughts on the basic concept of ethno-nationalism, yeah, it's fine, but, you know, that specific methodology to take a group of people that have been mixed together and then separate them again is a little bit more complicated than forming an ethno-state, you know, from some primordial roots that was ethnic, remained ethnic. You know, you'd think of like Poland or something. It's basically an ethno-state at this point. And it's, considering their policies, probably will remain one, so they're more or less homogenous. It's not like you go to Georgia and you've got this extremely multicultural area, along with all the the difficulties, of course, that attend it. Let's face it. But a lot of those difficulties are the result of politicians, really wealthy individuals, both black and white, fanning the flames of racial antagonism as a political issue every 4 years. And that's really where a lot of that comes from. When I look at Martin Luther King, I think of somebody who's somewhat apart from many of the other civil rights leaders at the time. Many of them wanted to resort to violence. He didn't care. He was like, oh, go ahead and hose me down. It doesn't even matter. He'd march anyway, and he and everyone else there, they'd get hosed down, or Bull Connor would attack them or something like that. And yeah, they were breaking the law at the time. And got thrown in jail, and he writes his famous letters from jail and gives his I Have a Dream speech. And then the government kills him because they're like, well, he's getting too close to actually achieving racial togetherness, and he's making the government's policies look bad. We'd better take this bastard out. Meanwhile, they ignore a lot of these others who are really more like primordial street gang movements, because that actually helps the government to enforce what it was saying at the time. Oh, look at these uppity Negroes. They're getting so violent. But as long as people were watching Martin Luther King and all these people marching that they wouldn't even fight back if you attacked them half the time, as long as the nation was transfixed on them, support to end segregation was growing. Support for civil rights was growing. Support for civic nationalism, in essence, was growing. And they couldn't have that, because if they wanted their long-term globalist line to work, they have to pit people against one another. Ultimately, that's one of the ways that they accomplish their goals. You keep people under stress so that they blame their neighbor, you know, the other little guy, you know, across town who's just of a different ethnicity or something. You blame them instead of looking at what Martin Luther King saw as the problem, which was the government itself. It was the government's policies that were making his life miserable, and indeed making white lives miserable as well. Groups like BLM, though, they don't see it that way. They're more like the groups that the government always gave its blessing to, because they rabble-rouse and they throw rocks, and so their communities, they're more violent, which helps the government prop up a police state that it then uses to abuse everyone and march closer and closer to this globalist dystopia. And then at the same time, people who are like, they're white or Asian or whatever, they look and they say, oh, well, this race of people, look how violent they're being. And it says black lives, so it's like all black people. And at the same time, they get the same idea. Civic nationalism goes past this and says, well, what's the point? Now, we've got so much government abuse. We got so many social problems, virtually all of which are created by Uncle Sam. People are worried. Like an ethno-nationalist says, well, illegal immigration's a problem. Well, yeah, no shit. Who put the immigration policies into play? Who ignores the border? who underfunds the border agents, who's responsible. It's the government that's responsible for it. It's not some random white liberal that happens to exist there and not care about the issue. They're not the one empowered to make any decisions over what happens with the border. You've got bad race relations. You got black on white crime or something in some inner city. You've got like the Crips and the Bloods, or you've got the Ku Klux Klan. Who ultimately encourages those groups? It's the government. Their own policies, the things they say, especially during elections, and what they do all year long, fundamentally props up such movements. It keeps them going. Because those movements' existence, those are intrinsic to the government's bottom line of this is why we need militarized police and domestic surveillance. This is why we need more government intervention on either side. The same figures within government that tell the social justice warrior or like some black community, yeah, those evil whites are too racist, we're going to desegregate this, and, you know, we're going to blanda it up, and we're going to move people around that are on, like, low-income housing and move them into white communities. The same people doing that and telling them how great that will be for the black community, also, on the same token, they tell the whites, oh, those minorities that are coming in, they're stealing your jobs, and that minority group is bringing crime, even though it's Uncle Sam that's causing all of these things to happen. See, the real enemy is statism. The real enemy is a government run amok. Now, it doesn't have any loyalty. When people say, like, oh, well, Obama's loyal to, like, social justice movement, and so the left sort of fawns over him, and people who are more maybe conservatives or traditionalists or whatever, they say, well, he's the great evil multicultural president that's trying to destroy the white race. That is, it's all an illusion that's been spun by that government to keep you fighting these sort of illusions, these shadows, while they abuse everybody. And so they can do it. Half the population will love the abuse. The other half starts attempting to fight the abuse, but they're not actually fighting the disease. They're just fighting symptoms of it, and they never make any real progress. So that's a little bit about Martin Luther King. I think if he was alive today, he wouldn't be an Obama fan, certainly. He wouldn't have voted for, he'd probably vote for Trump over Clinton, honestly, to tell the truth. He wouldn't support BLM, I can't imagine. Well, isn't it his daughter or niece or something came out and said, oh yeah, I voted for Trump because fuck this shit? Yeah, and BLM, they're not going to listen to him. If Martin Luther King were still alive, BLM would say, oh, well, he's outdated, old-fashioned, he's an Oreo, he's like gone full conservative mode, and now he's just like a white pawn or something like that. That's what they would say about him. They'd probably even say that about Malcolm X at this point. They've gone so far out in left field, they don't even understand how the world operates. These people, they just, their so-called leaders are just there to get attention, to attention whore, and to make money off of these things. That's why Shaun King and some of these others are involved, number one. And then the lay people, like the folks that show up at the Bernie rally and steal the microphone and start rambling about Black Lives while he's sitting over there cucked in the corner or whatever. Those individuals, some of them are just delusional. Some of them are trust fund babies that pretend to be delusional to score brownie points with the black community. Like maybe they're dating a black girl and so they just join BLM to show how multicultural and like diverse they are, something like that. And that's really what happens. It's the land of confusion all over again. It really is. It's true delusion in every possible sense of the word. I don't think that Martin Luther King would be very happy with what people are doing to his legacy, especially groups like BLM. That seek to lionize somebody who had nothing in common with what their goals are. That's about all. Peace out.